To believe that the halls of learning are a sanctuary from the darkness is the most dangerous lie whispered to the young. I have walked those corridors in my visions, not as they are, but as they truly exist, layered with the echoes of desperation, the cold ashes of ambition turned to madness. I have seen the shadows that cling to those ivy-covered brick walls, shadows that are not cast by the sun, but are fed by sleepless nights and silent screams. They tell you these are places of light and reason, but I am here to show you the truth, a truth etched in what looks like dried blood on the forgotten pages of discarded textbooks, a truth that whispers from the cold drafts that slither under locked dormitory doors at 3 in the morning. They are not sanctuaries, they are hunting grounds. The story begins, as so many do, with the illusion of a fresh start. A young man named Ethan, his mind a pristine canvas, arriving at Blackwood University with a heart full of naive fire. He was assigned a room on the forgotten top floor of the oldest residential hall, a place the cheerful campus guide called historics. But history is a wound that never truly heals. The room was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It smelled of dust and something else, something vaguely metallic and sweet, like old pennies and faded grief. He saw only a dusty window and worn floorboards. I saw the residue of a soul, a stain of despair that had soaked into the very plaster impossible to scrub clean. He spent his first nights attributing the sounds to the building's age. The creaking floorboards in the empty hallway, the mournful sigh of the wind through the window frame, the soft rhythmic tapping from within his own closet door. These are the excuses the sane mind makes to keep the madness at bay. But the shadows in his room were wrong. They stretched and writhed when he wasn't looking directly at them, pooling in the corners like spilled ink. I watched as he tried to study, the words on his textbook pages seeming to blur and rearrange themselves into patterns of cold geometric dread. The tapping grew more insistent, no longer a random noise but a code, a desperate, lonely message from the other side of a door that was already open. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The entity in that room was not a violent specter. It was something far more insidious. It was a parasite of sorrow. The previous occupant, a boy decades ago, had ended his life within those 4 walls, and his despair had become a conscious, hungry thing. It didn't want to scare Ethan. It wanted to consume his hope. It began with whispers, so faint he thought it was his own inner monologue. Words of failure, of loneliness, of the crushing weight of expectation. It fed on the natural anxiety of a freshman far from home, nurturing his small fears until they grew into monstrous certainties. The room was a cracked mirror, reflecting his own future failure. Ethan started to change. The bright optimism in his eyes was replaced by a haunted, hollow look. He stopped going to classes, convinced he was already destined to fail. His phone calls home became terse and infrequent, his voice a monotone whisper. The tapping in the closet was now accompanied by a soft weeping, a sound so full of anguish it felt like it could shatter glass. One night, he saw a full reflection in the darkened window pane as he sat at his desk. It wasn't his. It was a pale, gaunt face with eyes that were black pits of unending misery, its lips moving in silent mimicry of the doubts screaming in Ethan's own head. This is how the darkness wins, not with a jump scare, but with a slow, deliberate erosion of the soul. He tried to tell his resident advisor, a cheerful senior who spoke in platitudes about freshman jitters and homesickness. The university, that great institution of knowledge, had no protocol for a haunting. They offered counseling, suggesting his symptoms were merely stress. They couldn't see the fine, dark tendrils of another's misery wrapping around his heart. They couldn't smell the cold ashes of a forgotten suicide clinging to his clothes. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Let the echoes in the comments below confess if you've ever felt a presence in a place of learning, a cold spot in the library stacks, a whisper in an empty lecture hall that wasn't your own. Your testimony gives strength to the warning. The entity grew bolder as Ethan grew weaker. His own handwriting began to appear on the fogged-up bathroom mirror. Single words: alone, worthless, gone. He would wake up to find his textbooks arranged in strange, unsettling spirals on the floor. The weeping from the closet was now constant, a soundtrack to his waking nightmare. He had become a prisoner in his own room, the four walls a tomb. He was no longer just living in the space where a boy had died. He was reliving the final, agonizing days. The despair was not just an echo, it was a contagion, and his mind was the perfect host for its sickness. He had stopped fighting. He was beginning to listen to the whispers, to believe them. The breaking point came during a violent thunderstorm that shook the old dormitory to its foundations. The power went out, plunging the room into an absolute, suffocating blackness. For the first time, the weeping from the closet stopped. The silence that replaced it was infinitely more terrifying. Ethan, frozen in his bed, could feel a weight settle at the foot of his mattress. He felt the slow, deliberate crawl of ice-cold fingers up his leg, a touch devoid of life or warmth. He didn't scream. The capacity for it had been hollowed out of him. He simply lay there, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek, and waited for the end he now believed he deserved. What happened next was not a grand, violent exorcism. It was quieter, sadder. The entity wasn't trying to kill him. It was trying to merge with him. In that crushing darkness, Ethan saw the boy's final moments play out not as a vision, but as a memory. The pressure of his parents' expectations, the sting of a failed exam, the profound isolation. He felt the cold metal of the razor, the resignation, the final sigh. He understood the boy's pain, because it was now his own. The entity was offering him the same escape it had taken, an end to the struggle, a final quiet peace in the abyss. The ultimate lie whispered from the shadows, that is the true horror of that room. But the truth is, not all shadows are born from tragedy. Some are sought out, invited in through doors that should have remained sealed forever. Ambition can be a far more dangerous key than despair. Now imagine this, a library, not just a building of books, but a mausoleum of forgotten thoughts. At the heart of Blackwood University stood the Orphic Library, a Gothic cathedral of knowledge, its spires clawing at a perpetually gray sky. Most students knew only its well-lit upper floors, but deep below in a sub-basement forgotten by modern schematics lay the Umbral Archive, a place not for learning, but for damnation, a place sealed with more than just iron and rust. 3 students, bound by a shared arrogance, found their way there. There was Julian, the charismatic leader, driven by a lust for secrets no one else possessed. There was Lena, a brilliant but ruthless researcher, who saw history not as a lesson, but as a weapon. And there was Marcus, the cautious technician, whose skepticism was no match for his desire to be included. They heard the whispers, the campus legends of a forbidden collection, of books bound in materials other than leather. They saw it as a challenge, a rite of passage. They broke locks and bypassed alarms, their hearts pounding with the thrill of transgression, blind to the fact that they were not breaking in, but being lured. The air in the Umbral Archive was dead. It was thick and heavy, smelling of brittle paper, dried blood, and ozone, like the aftermath of a lightning strike in a graveyard. The shelves were carved from a black, oily wood that seemed to drink the light from their flashlights. And the books, they were wrong. Some were chained to the shelves, others were locked in iron cages. Their covers were made of strange, textured skins, their titles written in languages that seemed to squirm and writhe at the edge of vision. I saw their hubris, a bright, foolish flame in that suffocating darkness. They thought they were explorers. They were nothing but fresh meat, drawn to the scent of their own impending ruin. Julian's hands, trembling with excitement, fell upon a single large tome, resting on a stone lectern at the center of the room. It had no title. Its cover was a patchwork of pale, scarred skin, held shut by a clasp of tarnished black and silver shaped like a screaming mouth. Marcus felt the first real spike of fear, a cold serpent coiling in his gut, but Julian's laughter echoed unnaturally in the dead air. He called it the ultimate find. Lena, ever the academic, was already trying to decipher the script on the first page, her mind cataloging, analyzing, utterly failing to comprehend the true nature of what they had found. They were scholars standing on the precipice of hell, mistaking it for a new frontier of knowledge. Against Marcus's frantic protests, Julian pried open the silver clasp. The sound was not a click, but a wet, tearing sound, like cartilage being ripped from bone. The book fell open, and a puff of dust, fine as powdered bone, billowed into the air, carrying with it a scent of ancient decay, and something else, something that smelled of static and rage. The pages were not paper or vellum, but a thin, translucent membrane, and the ink was a dark, rusty brown that looked unnervingly like old blood. The text was a chaotic scrawl, but in the center of the open page was a diagram, a complex, maddening sigil that seemed to pull at their eyes, promising forbidden knowledge while simultaneously threatening to unravel their sanity. Lena, her academic curiosity overriding all instinct for self-preservation, began to read a passage aloud. Her voice, usually so clear and confident, became thin and reedy. The words were guttural, alien. They felt wrong in her mouth, like swallowing shards of broken glass. As she spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. The beams of their flashlights began to flicker and dim, not from failing batteries, but as if the light itself was being devoured by a growing, tangible darkness. The shadows in the corners of the archive deepened, no longer just an absence of light, but a presence, a hungry, listening presence that had been waiting for a voice to give it form, for a fool to extend an invitation. The ritual, for that is what it was, did not summon a demon with horns and wings. It awoke the library itself, or rather, the consciousness that had been bound within its foundations. The shelves began to shift and groan, the books rattling as if in a seizure. The aisles behind them seemed to stretch into impossible lengths, the exit they had entered through now gone, replaced by another row of leering, ancient tomes. The sigil on the page began to glow with a faint, sickly violet light, pulsing in time with their own terrified heartbeats. They were no longer in a basement. They had crossed a threshold and were now inside the book, trapped within the very knowledge they had sought to possess. And this is where everything changes for you. Understand that the entity was a librarian of souls. It didn't attack them with claws or teeth. It used their own minds, their own ambitions, against them. It began with Lena. It offered her visions, showing her lost historical texts, the answers to every academic question she had ever pondered. All she had to do was walk down a certain aisle to claim it. She took the bait. As she walked, the shelves closed in behind her, the aisle becoming a suffocating trap of paper and leather. Her friends heard a single muffled scream, and then silence. The library had simply absorbed her, cataloged her, another soul bound and shelved in the umbral archive. Marcus was next. The entity preyed on his fear. It created phantom sounds, the campus security guards just around the corner, the distant sound of his mother calling his name. It offered him illusions of escape, doorways that appeared only to lead to brick walls, staircases that spiraled into nothingness. He ran, blindly through the shifting labyrinth of shelves, his panic a delicious meal for the ancient consciousness. It herded him, toyed with him, until he collapsed from exhaustion in a dead-end corridor, weeping. The last thing he saw was a book falling from a high shelf, its pages fluttering open to reveal a freshly inked portrait of his own screaming face. Then the darkness took him. Only Julian remained, the architect of their doom. For him, the entity reserved a special fate. It didn't offer him knowledge or escape. It offered him power. It whispered to him from the pages of the grimoire, promising to make him its new keeper, to give him command over the secrets of the archive. It showed him visions of himself, feared and respected, wielding ancient and terrible power. And Julian, his ambition, a cancerous growth that had consumed all reason, accepted. He reached out to touch the glowing sigil, a greedy smile spreading across his face. As his fingers made contact, the book slammed shut, the silver clasp snapping closed on his wrist with the force of a bear trap. He was not its master. He was its new anchor. He was chained to the lectern, forced to watch over the collection for eternity, unable to die, unable to leave. His skin paled, his eyes hollowed out, becoming part of the room's dreadful ambiance. He is still there, in the darkness, a silent, screaming guardian of the knowledge that consumed him, a permanent addition to the collection. Every soul that joins my work feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your subscription, your like, it is a ward against such foolish ambition. It empowers the warnings, ensuring they reach those who might otherwise wander too close to a door that should never ever be opened. The worst mistake you can make is to assume all monsters are born of myth and magic. Some wear human skin. They walk among you on brightly lit campus paths, their smiles concealing an abyss colder than any haunted crypt. This is not a story of ghosts or ancient curses. This is a story of blood and bone, of the predator that mimics its prey, and the chilling truth that the most dangerous place on earth can be the short walk from the library to your car. I also believed the real world held less terror than the unseen, but a vision showed me the thin, cracked mirror that separates the two, and the things that can cross over. Her name was Chloe, a graduate student in cellular biology, a creature of logic and empirical data. She lived in the lab, fueled by coffee and a burning need to unlock the secrets of the universe, one petri dish at a time. The science building at Northgate University was a stark modern labyrinth of glass and sterile steel, a monument to reason. But after midnight, it transformed. The long, empty corridors became echo chambers for unseen footsteps. The hum of the ventilation system sounded like a low, predatory growl, and the motion-activated lights would snap on and off in the distance, revealing nothing but a deeper, more profound emptiness. A perfect place for a monster to hunt. There was an urban legend on campus, a ghost story the undergraduates would tell to spook each other. They called him the Proctor. The story went that a brilliant but deranged professor, decades ago, had begun to collect his brightest students, believing their minds were specimens to be preserved. They said he still walked the halls after dark, a shadowy figure in an old tweed jacket, searching for new additions to his collection. Chloe, a woman of science, scoffed at such tales. She dealt in facts, not folklore. She couldn't see the shadow that was already falling over her, a shadow cast not by a ghost, but by a very real, very patient man. Her routine made her predictable. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she worked late, often being the last to leave the building. The first sign was subtle, easy to dismiss. A research paper moved from one side of her desk to the other. A beaker, meticulously cleaned, found with a faint, oily fingerprint on its rim. The unease began as a low hum beneath the surface of her rational mind. She started to feel it, that primal, animal instinct of being watched. She would glance up from her microscope and feel a sudden chill, a sense of eyes on the back of her neck from the darkened observation window above her lab. When she looked, there was never anyone there, just her own reflection, looking pale and frightened. The Proctor was no ghost. He was a tenured professor from the humanities department, a man named Alistair Finch. To the world, he was a charming, eccentric academic, but behind his kind eyes was a void. He was the originator of the legend, a story he himself had carefully cultivated over the years to provide a supernatural explanation for the disappearances he orchestrated. He didn't kill them. He saw himself as a curator. He would stalk his chosen target, learn their fears, their habits, their breaking points. His methods were psychological, a slow, meticulous dismantling of their sense of safety until they were ripe for the harvest. Chloe, with her brilliant, orderly mind, was to be his masterpiece. The subtle manipulations escalated. One night, she found a single dead crow lying on the floor of the lab, a creature that had no business being inside a sealed, climate-controlled building. Another time, the security monitors in the main lobby flickered as she passed, showing a brief, grainy image of her own empty lab bench, but with a shadowy figure standing right where she had been moments before. She reported it to campus security, a pair of bored, overweight men who saw a stressed-out grad student, not a woman in mortal danger. They filed a report and told her to get more sleep. Her faith in systems, in order, was beginning to crack, and that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted her to doubt her own sanity. That was the key. He began leaving notes for her, written in a precise, academic script on university letterhead. They weren't threatening, not at first. They were critiques of her research, pointing out obscure flaws, suggesting alternative methodologies that were both brilliant and deeply unsettling. It was intimate. It was invasive. He was showing her that he had access to her most private work, that he was inside her world, inside her head. The Proctor wasn't just a physical threat. He was an intellectual one, a game of cat and mouse played on a board of existential dread. Chloe started triple-checking the locks, sleeping with a chair wedged under her doorknob. The game reached its terrifying climax on a cold, rainy Thursday. Chloe had decided to leave early, her nerves completely frayed. The campus was a ghost town, shrouded in fog and driving rain. As she walked through the deserted science building, the lights in the corridor ahead of her began to switch off, one by one, plunging the hallway into darkness that seemed to rush towards her. It was a deliberate, intelligent act. Panic finally broke through her scientific composure, and she ran. She fled through the maze of hallways, her own terrified breathing loud in her ears, the sound of calm, measured footsteps echoing behind her. Not running, just walking, confident, inevitable. She managed to get to her car in the deserted parking garage, her hands shaking so violently she could barely fit the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, her headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a figure standing perfectly still just a few feet from her bumper. It was Professor Finch, holding a black umbrella, a serene, pleasant smile on his face. He wasn't menacing. He wasn't threatening. He just stood there, smiling, as if he'd been waiting to congratulate her. That was the most terrifying part, the sheer, unadulterated madness of it. She slammed the car into reverse and sped away, not even looking back. But escape is an illusion. The next day, she went to the police, to the university dean. She had a name, a face, but Alistair Finch had an alibi. He had been hosting a dinner party with other faculty members, respected, tenured professors who all swore he was with them the entire evening. There was no proof, no evidence, just the frantic, hysterical story of an overworked grad student. He had planned it all. He had broken her, And now he was gaslighting the entire system into believing she was insane. The final piece of his collection was not her body, but her credibility, her sanity, her future. He had preserved her mind by shattering it into a million pieces. She dropped out of the program. She moved across the country, but she is not free. She lives in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, seeing his calm, smiling face in every crowd, because she knows, and I know, that he is still there. He is still teaching, still walking those halls, still watching. He is patient, he is brilliant, and he is already looking for his next specimen. The legend of the Proctor continues, a convenient fiction to mask a monstrous truth, a whisper to frighten students, while the real monster grades their papers and wishes them a good evening. The shadows recede for now, but they are always watching. Until the next whisper from the void, stay vigilant.